This is Social Leopards. I'm Bee.
And I'm Beth. A leopard is a solitary creature living in the jungle, but often not seen or noticed. Are you a solitary creature trying to navigate the social jungle?
This show explores loneliness and the many ways forward. Welcome to Social Leopards.
Hello, Social Leopards. Welcome back. I am Beth.
And I'm Bee.
And today, we're going to have a conversation with someone who happens to be a former coworker and a friend of mine. Her name is Kristin Lawson, and she is going to talk about her life as a child-free woman and has agreed to share her personal journey with us as a woman who is living her truth despite what can sometimes be some pretty strong societal opinions. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks for being here.
So let's start us out by having you just share your personal journey with us a little bit, and we'll just talk as we go.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great. So in terms of being child-free, that journey, I knew from a very young age that I did not want to have children. I grew up as an only child. I was often alone a lot as a kid, and I knew probably when I was like 8 or 9 that I didn't want children, and it has stuck with me throughout the entirety of my life. And here we are today. There have been times in my life where, as I imagine women who have children as well, I've had doubt. Am I making the right decision? Am I not? Is this the right thing for me? And ultimately, I've always come back to that choice, but it hasn't always been easy. And I think we'll get into some of that here today. But it's been a choice and a decision that has been with me for a very long time. For as long as I can remember and having consciousness, I have never, did not feel any sense of wanting to have children or be a parent. So I know probably gets into questions of what is the maternal instinct, what is that, or biological thing, is it not? But for me, it's always been there.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. People probably would start with that, but I do think some people just don't have a strong desire to have children. So I don't think that's so atypical. It's just something we don't talk about, right? I think that's part of what it is. We just are thinking, oh, we're all supposed to want to have that. Sometimes we don't.
It is.
That's right.
Yeah, there's always an expectation according to the history of how things go. And you watch TV shows and
Traditional history,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Traditional female male roles.
Yes.
If you're still stuck in that, yeah.
And even on sitcoms and stuff, it's the moment you get married or you're in a serious committed relationship, that's when are we going to see grandchildren and all that kind of talk happens.
There is. And you know what? So I have 2 friends who have, each of them have children. And my one friend has been pressuring her kids so much to have kids. And the other friend is saying, stop doing that because it's their choice. And what if you never have them? So what? You still have your kids. So you can't just do that. You can't put people in that situation. Their relationship has really gotten really bad because they don't want to talk to her because every time it's, oh, you're getting old. All these. So there is that point too.
Yeah, and that gets to how much pressure women are under from a very young age. I think society molds us and shapes us and tells us that being a mother in motherhood is the pinnacle of what it means to be a woman. And having these kinds of conversations with other women and with men, of course, too, is so important for us to challenge those norms. And I think that's what I do oftentimes out there in the world and life, and that can be difficult for other people. I've experienced that in my life as well, especially with other women. That has been difficult for other women, I think, to hear that I don't want children. There's a lot of questioning of why that is. And I think for them too, there's a question of why didn't I make that choice? Why wasn't that choice available to me? And that's ultimately what I would love for women to take away from this conversation, and men, that it is a choice. We don't have to subscribe to societal norms just because it's the norm.
Yeah.
2 sons, and I believe that they will also remain child-free. I know that one son made that conscious decision as well, and it was societal that was the decision maker for him. He wasn't sure he wanted to bring a child into this world at this particular time. Talked about perhaps fostering or doing other things to, if that desire came along, they knew they had other options to fill that gap, if there is a gap to fill, because they didn't know, because they made the decision relatively young as well, and they wanted to keep options open, but decided that if for some reason their perspective changed, that they would adopt, and that would be the way they would go if that decision was made. And in retrospect, it worked out the way it was supposed to work out. And I, being a grandmother, I think I enjoy that experience, but at the same time, I respected the decision that was made, and I don't hound him or ask him if his perspective has changed. I figure if that would ever happen, then he would just share that with me. Yeah, but it's very difficult to separate your own thoughts and preferences from someone else's. Not everybody lives the same lifestyle.
And for me, so I was working up until just recently as a school psychologist. So I encountered many children that were impaired, whether it was because of accidents, whether it because it was an in utero situation. And I will tell you, my interest in having children was definitely affected, and I did not have a child until much later in life, primarily because of my anxiety and awareness of the fact that if I brought a child into the world that had a delay or had some kind of a issue, the quality of life would be so poor for them, and it would be a stressor for me. And even though I work with those kids and I love working with them, I personally knew that I could not do that. I could not be a parent of a disabled child. I know that's that might be a cruel thing, or maybe
It's a real thing. It's real.
but like as they say, a non-PC thing to say, but to me, that was my reality. So as we just said, it depends what your reality is, and the more information you have, almost the more confusing it can become as to whether you're going to have a child or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I want to go back in time, Kristin, to a time when you learned something about your health history, if you are willing to share that.
Absolutely.
And I remember us having a conversation cube to cube. I think we used to live in cubicles
Cube
next
to
to
cube,
one
I
another
love it.
in a world, in a land far away long ago.
Right. Pre-COVID.
And, yes. And you were struggling with whether or not to get that surgery, and the final implication of just loss of choice, even though you felt comfortable and confident, still was a whole turning point for you. Do you mind talking a little bit about
Sure. Yeah. So I tell people when I'm having a conversation about being child free that I'm both intentionally child free and unintentionally child free. Intentionally, in the sense of, as I've mentioned, I've never felt the need to have children. But also in 2018, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And the choices before me were to have a radical hysterectomy or go a slightly different route and have like radiation and different kinds of therapies to try to keep my reproductive organs so I could possibly have children down the line. Ultimately, I made the choice and the best choice for me, to have a radical hysterectomy. So I was able to keep my ovaries, yay. So I didn't go into menopause,
Right.
but I lost everything else. And at that time, it was a difficult choice it was so final to say, you know what, this is something, even though this has been with me my whole life, and I've always really worried about getting pregnant, and I've always taken a lot of safeguards not to get pregnant in my life, but to still be faced with that choice of having to permanently make the decision was hard. Absolutely, to make that kind of a choice. But ultimately, two things came into play. My health. Having a radical hysterectomy is the gold standard for treating cervical cancer, and it wasn't as important to me to maintain my reproductive organs for the possibility that I might change my mind somewhere down the line. At that point, I think I was 36 when I was diagnosed. So, not that I couldn't have physically had children, but you're getting on the
Absolutely.
tail end anyway. So, ultimately, it came down to what's best for me, what has been my truth throughout the entirety of my life, and sticking with that decision and truly putting a stake in the ground and saying, that's it, no more. Since then, I will say, while I certainly did not want to get diagnosed with cervical cancer in order for this to happen, I have been really relieved to not have to worry about getting pregnant. Not at the expense of my health, of course, but I am over 5 years, no evidence of disease, so that's great.
Wonderful.
So that's awesome, and I think it was the right choice. But that specific time frame that you're mentioning, it was really difficult, and I had to really search myself and make sure that I was making the right choice for myself, and I did.
Yeah, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That had to be so difficult.
Thank
I mean,
you.
being
Yeah.
faced with that and just how do you, it just really had to be overwhelming. How did you help yourself inform your decision? Did you reach out to other specialists or what did you do?
I had a really wonderful team of people who are around me who I was able to consult with, medical professionals. I also have been in and out of therapy for most of my adult life. Of course, I talked with my therapist at the time about it, but really what I had to do was sit down and be with myself, sit in silence. I practice a lot of somatic exercises like yoga, meditation, things like that, and to just be quiet, and make sure that I was aligned with myself, which I think is something that women, people who are child free, have to do to make sure that we are aligning ourselves with our truth. And ultimately, I listened to myself, and it's not always the easiest thing to do, but it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. Did you have any difficulty with forcing their opinions upon you during that time?
I will say I've had that my whole life, not just during that time. I will say probably people were less opinionated during that time because of the delicate nature
Yeah.
of the situation. But throughout my lifespan, especially in my 20s and 30s, got a lot of opinions from people about why I should have children and why my decision, questioning my decision, even as recently as of last year. And I would like to think that I am beyond those years at this point, but apparently not. I still have people asking me as if it's appropriate, why don't you have children? It's so interesting. I went to a couple things about that. I went to a meetup group. I think it was actually earlier this year, and I had just met this person for the first time. And we were, of course, talking generalities. And the first question that she asked me was, why not? Why don't you have children? And I've gotten that question a lot in my life. And I will say I've only gotten that question from women, which I think is really interesting. I've never gotten that question from a man when I've mentioned this before. My retort back to that, and it's taken me several years to get to the place of being able to say this. My response back is, I'm willing to have that discussion if you're willing to discuss why you chose to have
Right.
children.
Oh, yeah, that's fair because I think you're at that point, but initially I'd be irritated, but I think that person really is just living in their bubble of,
Exactly.
whoa, you're a woman, you should have kids. Why don't you have kids or something? Like they don't understand that there's other options. So I think if you get to that point, you'd realize that person's not trying to be offensive. They're just
Exactly.
living in their own bubble.
But I love that response
Yeah.
because it opens the door to information, education, and
Right.
advocacy. Because I've known women who wanted to have children and were unable, unsuccessful, and how hurtful it is
Yep.
to make assumptions and right because of your gender that you have this obligation. It's beyond my comprehension. And for you to handle it that way and then also offer that willingness to have that conversation, I think is very brave. And I think that's the perfect response. I'm glad you found it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It took me like 20 years.
I was thinking, you just made me think of a friend of mine. She lives out of town and she was so desperate to have children, but she couldn't find the right partner. So she never did. And I thought that's another thing. She was completely fine but she just was so obsessed that I have to have some kind of a partner. I can't be a single parent. So it's a whole nother interesting situation. Like these days you can do so many things. You can get a donor, you can adopt, but I can't be single. So she never did.
Yeah.
And she was regretting that.
Yeah.
So I remember when you had that procedure that it was a very difficult and rather isolating recovery.
Yeah.
And you chronicled that experience and as a way to try to share with others who might be going through it, which I also thought was very brave. And so do you want to talk a little bit about just those emotional challenges?
Yeah.
during that
Yeah.
time frame?
I decided when I was leading up to having the hysterectomy that I was going to chronicle all of it and online. So I made YouTube videos about how I was prepping for it, how I was prepping for it emotionally, logistically, all of those kinds of things. And then I also talked about the aftermath of it and what that felt like for me, how I was going through it emotionally, physically. It was a difficult recovery for a radical hysterectomy. Most hysterectomies, especially if they're elective, are done laparoscopically, which is a relatively quick turnaround time, and a small incisions is done robotically. But for a radical hysterectomy, you're cut open essentially completely across your body. And I was out of work for 12 weeks, and I essentially had to relearn how to walk, not because of anything was wrong with my legs, but because my core was just had been completely shredded. And so I couldn't walk for a period of time, and then I started walking with a walker, and eventually I couldn't drive also for the majority of that time frame, so I was completely reliant on other people to go to the grocery store for me
Mm.
and do all the kinds of things that one would do in their normal life. So yeah, it was really isolating. It was really difficult. I was home alone a lot, which is part of the reason why I made those videos, was to be able to offer to people, this is what this looks like. Not for everybody. Everybody's going to have a different experience, of course, but for me, this is what this looks like. It was also important for me to chronicle less necessarily about being child free, but more about cervical cancer. That was something that was shocking to me, to get that diagnosis after years of having normal pap smears. And then 1 year I didn't. That was something that was also important for me to get out there. But of course, that's woven in with the whole child free conversation. So I'm proud of that, the legacy, if you will, of those videos. I still have people that reach out to me on YouTube to talk to me about them. So I'm glad that I did it. And I think it was a cathartic process for me to be able to go through that. And I'm glad that it's out there for other people too, because I didn't have the benefit of that for myself. That was the other thing. And that's another thing that plays into being a child-free woman. There's just simply not a lot of resources for us out there. And it was similar with my experience with going through the hysterectomy. So again, part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation too is to be a resource for other women who might be in a similar place or even on the fence, and to have a lasting legacy of media that's out there in the ether for everybody to be able to access.
Did you have an aha moment during your recovery that stands out when, I don't know, I should stop right there and just.
I don't know. I don't think so, because going into it, I had already been so firm for most of my life. There was a small period where I questioned myself, but I had been really firm for most of my life on being child free. I think that once I was fully recovered, which it took probably 4 months or so before I really felt like myself again and could go back to the gym and live a normal lifestyle. I remember there was one time in the gym when I was walking around the track, and I think I even made a video like in that moment about it, of feeling, okay, this is it. This is my new life. I'm here. I don't have to worry about having children anymore. I am cancer free as far as I knew at that time, and still am. And we can live past these things, and we can thrive, and we can survive and start a new chapter. And I think that was the door closing. I was like, okay, I'm done now. It's time to move on to other things. And it's become less of a focus, being whether or not, because before I had the hysterectomy, of course, you're always thinking, oh, what if I get pregnant? What would happen if I got pregnant? There's all these kinds of questions that swirl around. I don't have to have those questions anymore. I don't have to worry about these things. And so it's a door that's shut, and shut doors are scary, but they're also liberating. And I felt liberated by it.
Yeah, the finality of things definitely I think is liberating. They say when you have you lose a relationship, and if you lose a spouse through death, that door closes, but through divorce, the door is still open. And I think it's almost tougher because there is no finality. They're still out there, and there's always the possibility of being re-traumatized, but whatever happens. So I think there is some peace when you know that you can't go back somewhere, you know, that it's completely
Exactly.
done. Yeah.
Exactly.
And there is a grieving process associated, even though you were very educated, you were very aware, you were very clear on your purpose and your mission, basically, that
Yeah.
this was the best path for you. I I feel like you had a lot of time that by virtue of being almost homebound for the first several
Yes.
weeks. And we've talked about that just over much smaller injuries.
Oh my
that
gosh,
maybe
yes. You're
happened.
reminding me again of my broken ankle. Oh,
Oh, that's the
Yes.
worst.
oh, because if you're an independent person, that lack of
Yes.
freedom to be able to freely move and just having to constantly readjust every moment of what you're doing, it's just like having to be dependent on people when you're,
Uh,
it's just tough. That's
Yes,
just,
it is.
yeah, yeah.
you went through that for many weeks. So who helped you when you were recovering?
My mom came up from where she lives, and that was great. She was able to stay with me for, I think, the first maybe 3 weeks or so, 3 to 4 weeks. And I live with a partner, so he was able to really take care of me.
Oh,
There was a point, especially the first month or so, where, I couldn't bathe myself really because I had to, it was hard to stand up.
mm-hmm,
So I had to have those shower seats that you can
mm-hmm,
get.
mm-hmm.
He had to help dress me. It was the whole 9 yards. So I'm very lucky and grateful for that, that I wasn't single at that time and dealing with that. It would have been very difficult.
Yeah.
But and so I'm thankful for that. Also, neighbors, friends would come help me, and we had meal trains and stuff like that. But there is a grieving process, just touching on the
Yeah.
grief part. I don't feel grief anymore about not having children. I think what I feel kind of continual stages of grief about is when you don't have children, the same as when you do have children, there are milestones throughout one's life that I will not have. I will not become a grandparent. I will not watch my child graduate high school. I just had a friend yesterday whose child graduated high school and it was monumental for them. I won't see my child get their first job or fall in love or any of those things that kind of go along with having children. And those things we face throughout our life, like over and over again. And that's not easy to deal with, even though I'm resolute in my decision and at this point don't have a choice. It's still a process of grief to continually go through.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. But
Yeah.
yes, you're exposed to that and other people's excitement. They can't really,
Yeah.
I'm sure you wouldn't want them to quell their
No,
excitement
no,
for their life history just
of course not.
because. But it can be probably a little bit triggering at times, I would assume. But
Yeah, it's activating in the
mm,
sense of, oh, I'm revisiting what it means to
Right.
not have a child.
Right.
And ultimately, because I am resolute in my choice, it's okay. But it still doesn't mean that I don't feel a sense of ping
Right.
kind of deep in my gut of, okay, that's never going to be me. Of course, their life is never going to be mine
Right.
either. And it goes both ways. But it's something that I think I've recognized as I've gotten older. In my 20s, when you're more on the same foundation as a lot of women and men who probably don't have kids, that starts to lessen throughout the lifespan, right? So people start to have children as friendships start to fade away because women are focusing on their families. And I'm still here ready to have a deep and meaningful friendship with you, but they may not have the time or the opportunity or whatnot, which makes sense. Family has to come first. But we lessen, our numbers start to lessen. So, right now in my age range, about 17% of women don't have children for whatever reason, statistically. And that's a small number. We tend to operate on the fringes, we're outside the bell curve of society, and that can be a lonely, difficult place to be at times.
yeah, I'm glad you had that statistic at the ready. I meant to look that up before
Yeah.
this interview and I failed.
I would bet that's pretty close. I'm thinking about our friend group, and I think there are two people in our group that never had children. One of them, they just, I don't think they really ever wanted kids, and then there was a sandwich generation. It was like in between us and our parents that like were a long time ago just had decided we don't want kids. And then there's the other couple I'm thinking of just couldn't. But yes, of the group, there is a very small number, yeah, that doesn't have kids. You're right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And along the lines of people who can't, this isn't a conversation that very many people
Correct.
have in
Yeah.
life, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult. And so thank you again for being so
Yeah.
open and
Yeah.
willing to just say exactly what's on your mind. But I can remember a time when I lived out in California and there was someone that I worked with, and they were very open about this as well and had no issues talking about it. And I remember at that time, because I was less mature, less life experience, less of everything. And I think I was a young mother at the time. And so my hormones were in a different place and my maturity level was in a different place. I shied away from that conversation because it made me uncomfortable. It just did. And I look back and I'm like, I should have been more curious. And I could have, there are different ways I could have handled it. I accepted it. I didn't question it. I didn't ask any why not questions because I'm not that kind of person, but
Thank you.
yes. But I remember almost hoping that topic never came back up again or something because I just couldn't connect with it, I think. But as time has progressed and I have seen a lot more life and I have understood the journeys that different people have led, I have a lot more empathy than I did back in the year 2000.
It's funny you say this. I definitely will say the same. I have more awareness, but there's a friend of mine, and of course this is years ago, who told me the only reason that she would not have a child is because it would ruin her figure. And I thought, are you kidding me?
I'm not
it
sure
still
if that's,
sticks out in my mind. No, it just does.
There are people that just want to maintain
Isn't that
who they are.
no judgment, but that's just not a reason I think I would choose one way or the other because it's going to ruin my figure. And that just seems,
Well,
Yeah.
I think that's perfectly valid. I think that bodily autonomy is a big part of not having children. When you have a child, you do not have control over your body, but you're a host, essentially, for this child at the end of the day to bring a child into the world. And that's one of the beautiful things about our bodies, to be able to do that. But we do lose control of that. And I do know people in the community, in the child-free world. It wasn't necessarily something that was on my mind, but I do know people in that world that did not want to experience childbirth for those reasons. It's a brutal process to go through childbirth.
it is.
And I think that there's possibly fear around that and a lack of desire to put one's body through it. I think whatever choice women make or men to not have children is valid. For me, it was shaped for many years. It's interesting that you mentioned, B, about having children later in life because you worked with children who were impaired. I too had that experience. First of all, I grew up as an only child, which I'm certain had an impact on that. Not having siblings around me, I had a lot of independence as a child. I was also an only grandchild, so there was a lot of focus just on me. And I was cool with that. I didn't necessarily want to share that with anybody else. It was also lonely. It was also hard, but I'm sure that shaped me. But as I went into my 20s and 30s, I was a teacher. And initially I worked with preschool age kids and kindergarten age kids. And also, as a side note, child-free people don't hate children. That's something that we get a lot and questions that we get a lot. We don't. I love kids. I've volunteered with kids from the entirety of my adult life. But also, from there, I started working with children who were significantly impaired, who had autism. And for 10 years of doing those things, it was a huge eye opener to me. I also, I should say, grew up with an uncle who was cognitively impaired and lived with my grandparents. And he would live with them until their death. And so I saw from a young age and into my formative years what would happen to one's life if you had children that had impairments for whatever reason, whether they're cognitive, physical. Having a child with special needs is extremely difficult. And I didn't want to take that risk. I didn't want my to take the risk of having a child that needed that sort of care because I didn't think that I was going to be able to do that. So that's another factor for me that shaped my decision in not having children. So it's so varied for
It is,
everybody.
it is. But yeah, the more information, as we said before, you have, either that's going to hurt you or it's going to help you. It's hard to say because you could just get so overwhelmed and think, oh my gosh, all these things to go wrong. So there has to be that balancing, as you said, moment where you say, I personally feel for me that I just don't have that desire. And that's going
Right.
to override everything else I
Every-
hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It weeds out the rest of the noise.
Yep. Is there another misconception about living as a child-free person? We won't even limit it to women that you would like to share with us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot out there. Honestly, I think one misconception is that we live extravagant, responsibility-free lifestyles. That is simply not the case. I have as a lot of I have more responsibility in my life than I want, let me tell you. I work a full-time job. I have a house. I have friends and family. I have an aging parent who I'm helping, a disabled brother. I have a lot of responsibility in my life that negates me from just traveling the world or making rash decisions whenever I want. And I think that popular media likes to throw out there that people without children can just do whatever they want whenever they want. And there is a measure of reality in that, but it's mostly not true. We live lives just like the rest of everybody. We just don't have kids. I think another misconception, and this is something that we hear a lot from people, is that we'll regret it at some point.
Ah,
And I can tell you that I've never regretted it. And there's a lot of evidence. I won't say a lot because there's not been a lot of research done on child free people, but there is some evidence to suggest that across the lifespan, and particularly when we reach a certain age, that the happiest population of people out there are people who are child free and unmarried. And you can probably guess the reasons why.
Yes, I can. Well, I think I can see if my child was doing her thing, I think I'm going to have a great retirement and she's successful, she's independent, I don't have to worry about her. Yes, I will have a great retirement. However, if that does not happen, I'm not sure how happy you know what I'm saying? So I could totally
Yeah.
I could understand how that would be true.
I wasn't able to really travel and fulfill kind of some of my early bucket list items as a young adult because I had children at a very young age, until I became somewhat child free by virtue of my children aging out of the home and becoming independent. And so I can see a lot of that, and it doesn't make me any less responsible of a human. I still have everything. And you missed something when you were listing your response. You are, in one instance, because you are a fur mama.
Yeah, I
Oh.
am. There's three of them running around here.
Aw. Cats or dogs or what do you have?
They're cats. I'm definitely a cat person. We just added a new one to the bunch a few months
Aw.
ago. Yes, it's
Yes.
a rescue and we love him. He's still adjusting, but it's going so far. And that's actually another misconception. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yes.
Is that we do not nurture. We nurture, believe me, especially women. We're nurturing our family and friends and our partners and our fur babies. And just because we don't have children doesn't mean that we aren't nurturing the next stage of life. And for me in particular, because I've mentioned I volunteer with kids, it's always been important for me to have a connection to younger generations because another unique thing about me is that I will never be an aunt. I will never have siblings that they're going to have children, right? For me it's important to stay connected to younger kids because it's what keeps us young in a lot of ways. I'm a big sister with big brothers, big sisters, and I love it, and it's hopefully will be a part of my life for as long as I can do it. But yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions out there about us, but I'm here to challenge it.
I love
Good.
it. Yes. So let's go back just for a minute because I don't want to lose sight of this one. What about men? Let's talk a little bit about men who have chosen to be child free. So
Okay.
what do you think is the core reason for, or your general thoughts about why society doesn't pressure men to the extent that they pressure women, just because a woman has a womb? Or do you think there's more to it?
I think there's a lot of reasons why. I think ultimately it's because we live in a misogynistic, patriarchal world.
Oh, well, okay.
I mean,
I think I was going to say something like that. So yes, you said it.
Ultimately, I think that's why our women's bodies are politicized. Not to go down that conversation, but our bodies are politicized, and people feel as though they have a say over what we do and do not do and the choices that we make. And men aren't a part of that conversation. They don't get that same judgment as women do. It's interesting. I was asking my partner before I came on here, I was like, do you feel like you've been judged throughout your lifespan and for choosing to not have children? And I don't know if I've been judged so much as it's just curious. People are possibly curious about it. But for me, I feel like I have been very harshly judged throughout my life. Even if we look at some of the words that we use to describe men and women who do not have children, what are some of the words that come to mind when we think of a woman who is in her 40s or 50s and doesn't have children?
Selfish.
Sure, that's come up. I've been called selfish before.
Right. Yes.
Spinster is
Spinster.
one. Yeah, especially if you have cats like me, crazy cat lady. That's something that comes up often. I can't think of what words might be for men who choose to be child free. The only thing that I can think of, bachelor. He's a bachelor.
Gigolo? Oh, no.
Yeah, he's out there living his life. He's doing his thing. But for us, there's an expectation that we do certain things in our lives. And I think ultimately, until women run the world, it'll probably be that way.
Thank you for living your life and doing your thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Kristin.
Yeah, we got to follow that. It's hard for us. We're still, I think, inundated with our traditional values. And I think when you talked about regret before, I do think a lot of people regret things not because it's regretful, but because we think we should regret it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Because we're told that we should,
Yes.
or other people think that we should. And so therefore that leaks into our subconscious. But ultimately, I think that any choice, any self-truth, whether it's being child-free or choosing to have children, comes back to knowing yourself. And that's what this journey has been about for me. It is really a constant discovery and rediscovery of myself and my truth and what's important to me, and aligning my life to my values. And I think that is a universal trait of whether you have children or not.
Yeah, I think society preys on us. They want us to be disconnected because then they can control us more. That's really part of it, I think. So
Absolutely.
So I'm glad that you're working on that. I'm working on that. Still, it's been a long time and I still have not been completely connected. It's a work in progress, as they say.
It is. And it starts with having conversations like this. And I'm just glad that I've been able to get my voice out there and that you guys had an interest in talking about it too. And, that your listeners will hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one more question about, I'm just thinking about this like for the very first time, so forgive me, but
Okay.
I'm thinking about how, and I hate using the word lucky because I don't really believe in luck, but you found a partner who fully supports you and is also supportive of a child-free lifestyle. Do you think that there was some like fate in that, or was that like a search for someone who shared that same values, or did you just find each other?
I think we just found each other. I do think luck plays a hand in anything like this, meeting people, whether it's platonic or romantic. I do think that part of the reason why it works for us is that we both did not want children. We were both on the same page about that, and it was something that we talked about very early on in the relationship. Within the first few months of us being together, it was a conversation, because I would not engage in a relationship with somebody that did want to have children. That clearly wouldn't work. So I think it was luck at the end of the day that we happened to go to the same concert alone on the same night and met each other there, and it worked out. We've been together going on 13 years now.
That's it.
So it's an artist named, I'm going to be surprised if you've heard of him, but her name is Bat for Lashes.
No, I don't know. Okay.
Look her up. Look her up. It's good. But yeah, we met there. We had each gone solo out, and that's something else. If you're going to be child free, you should learn how to be alone with yourself. And I learned that from a really young age. And so I often do things solo and am happy to do that. And we met there, and the rest is his history. And we both love cats. So that ended up working out too. So we have fur babies and rescue them. And that's what we do. And we
I love
camp, go hiking.
Yes, you do live a very active lifestyle. That's probably
I
very
do.
helpful. Yeah.
It is. It is.
So before we wrap up, is there any particular thing that you would like to share with someone who feels the same way, that they would like to remain child free? Maybe they're getting a little bit of pressure, maybe they're not, maybe they're on the fence, maybe they feel guilty for wanting that lifestyle and they're not sure how to come to acceptance. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you can say to help them on that journey?
Yeah. I think what I'll say is that your choice is valid. What you want for yourself is, we have one life, and that's it. That, in my view, and live it according to your truth. And it can be difficult to get to that place. Some people know it right off the bat, and some people have to search for it for years. But I think all of us know, if we're quiet enough and sit still enough, we all know what's right for us and what isn't underneath all of the noise. It's just a matter of getting to it. So take the time and put the effort into yourself and love yourself enough to make the hard choice, even if it means that you have to invalidate that decision over the course of your life, or have conversations about it to your family and your friends. People will listen, and the people who are meant to be there for you won't judge you, and you'll educate some along the way, and you'll stand as truth for other people who want to make this choice too at some point in their life.
Very good words.
Yep.
Solid advice. All right. I think that was the last
Well,
of
thank
my
you so much. It was a
questions for
pleasure
this.
talking to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Yes, again, a very needed conversation that I wish and hope gets a little bit more exposure and time out on the airwaves, because it's definitely a conversation
Yeah,
that
because
was
there
well
are
worth
many
having.
people struggling, young and old, with choices like what it's a huge choice, huge
Yes.
responsibility, and I think we don't have enough, as you said, resources or advice is what to do.
I agree.
All right. Check out the show notes for this episode for some extra links that might be helpful for you as you navigate this journey. Thank you again, Kristin, for your time today. And until next week.
Bye.
Hey, social leopards. Don't slink back into the jungle quite yet. We have 2 important messages to share. First, remember to like this episode, drop us a comment, and if you haven't done it yet, follow this show or subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can reach us on social media. You can also email share@socialleopards.com to contact us privately. All links are in the show notes. We love and appreciate hearing from those who listen to the show.
Second, we want you to know that this show is not intended to be a replacement for professional therapy. If you are struggling or if you need to interact with another person, check out the show notes for resources. Thanks for listening.